if you're in like an apartment and there's no services provided, versus if you start to get into like an adult family housing. This is more similar to like a group home that you'll see in other cases, where there starts to be more, planned activities, planned assistance, a little more checking in on the person who would be in an apartment unit, all the way up to kind of what would be more considered an RCAC or residential care apartment complex. That's where you're actually starting to access, maybe meals are provided in addition to the actual, traditional room and board. You may have some light services, but it's really limited in the hours at which care is provided. So from those range to just purely, an apartment into some level of care, that's where you're going to see kind of your lower levels of costs. Now, even this is increasing. You're more looking at like a couple of $1,000s a month. It could be on the lower end of more like $2,000 up to approaching more like $4,000. It depends on probably how nice your apartment is or other things with that. But I think what's really important is how much services are you accessing? That's what determines probably your more level of care. Now, I find that most clients do enter into an assisted living facility. Now you're going to see assisted living facilities either be those RCACs or more commonly CBRFs, which are community-based residential facilities. Now, this is where nurses are actually, more on staff. They have more set hours. This is your traditional, there's a shared dining and more activities. But what's nice about the CBRF is it's not your, highest or more expensive level of care, but there's still care being provided. This is kind of more commonly where I do see people start beyond leaving at home. So with the CBRF, that's often where you'll have like your own individual room, no kitchen. They'll have various care packages. And then this can really range in costs. And these costs, remember, are all indicative based on the level of care that you need. So if you only need a couple of hours, your costs at the facility are lower. If you need more hours of care, it's going to be higher. We are seeing right now in our area an average of about $4,500 a month, probably on the lower end for this. Now, it can start to really range up more to that $6,000 or $8,000, especially if someone starts to have memory care concerns. So with a memory care facility, often that's considered like a lockdown facility or something that requires more hands-on attention, therefore more care, and it's more expensive. So if you start to be in more of a memory care facility within a CBRF or as its own independent facility, you're going to be seeing costs probably more in that $6,000 to $8,000 a month range. Now, combative memory care is a completely different ballgame, but just kind of in general. After the CBRFs is where you really get up into what's called skilled nursing. So your traditional idea of a nursing home. So this is where you're going to have skilled kind of round the clock care. You're going to find either a daily rate that a facility is going to charge or a monthly rate. You may be able to find more semi-private rooms, but you're going to really find that this is more, kind of akin to hospital rooms. This is really what people think about when they think about traditional nursing homes. But that's your highest level of care. So we're already seeing this being in that more $10,000 to $12,000 a month care. And that is what we're seeing kind of increase as we're getting less and less, skilled nursing facilities. Now, the last and most expensive thing could really be, again, your at-home care. If you need enough care that is, more cost than even to go into a skilled nursing facility, that's going to be your highest level of care. So I know it's a really big goal for lots of people to stay at home, but it may not always be possible based on those care costs, as well as we are also seeing just a shortage of workers, which may mean that it's harder to coordinate truly someone being there 24/7, which is something that a facility would be able to provide. So that's kind of what you're looking at for levels. I've identified a lot of those costs as we've gone through. Obviously, it really depends on, the quality of that facility, the cost of the care related to how many care hours someone needs. So now we get into the kind of fun part, which is, or not fun part, but paying for it. How do you pay for this? How do you pay for some of these costs that can be, $10,000, if not more a month? And the first answer is, what is your income look like? Because if your income in retirement is sufficient to meet your care expenses, then we're less worried because you're not tapping into your life savings. Otherwise, you're paying based on income alone. So if you are in that like independent living or low level with RCACs or CBRFs, you may have enough income with your Social Security, pension, whatever you have, RMDs, to sustain that cost without tapping into your other assets. And that's kind of the first way you pay for care. Now, another way that you can actually look to pay for care would be if you have long-term care insurance. So long-term care insurance is not your short-term, disability. It's not AFLAC or other things like that. It's specifically around paying for these, nursing expenses, either at home or in a facility. So what I would say is that there used to be these like big Cadillac policies available for long-term care insurance that kind of promised the sun and moon and stars and were pretty expensive. That was kind of a big problem with their actuarial tables. So you'll find that a lot of companies that offer those things don't exist anymore or do not offer those policies anymore. So if you have a long-term care insurance policy that pays either an indefinite amount of money or a pretty high amount of money for forever, you need to hold on to that policy. You're not going to find it again. Those are really, really helpful policies. Now, if you don't have long-term care insurance, but are looking into it, what I would say is that, I don't sell long-term care insurance. None of the attorneys do. We're attorneys. But I can see the impact that it has on my clients and why it's really helpful. The idea being with facilities that Medicaid, which is a government program that helps to pay for care, pays less than a private pay individual does. So facilities, because they're businesses, they need to know for X many people we have on Medicaid, we have this many people privately paying. So what they do when you go to get admitted there is they'll tell you, you have to pay for a year or 2 years or 3 years privately before accessing Medicaid. Can you guarantee how long will you be able to pay? And this is where the long-term care insurance comes in. Because with accessing care, and it can be at home too, but really with a facility, what it allows you to do is show that you will be able to pay for the year or 2 years or 3 years, whatever it would be. Now, ideally with long-term care insurance, what I do like to see is something that's going to cover maybe like 3 to 5 years of care would be really good. That's going to cover, 3 to 5 years of care. That'll cover most private pay requirements. So that's really helpful to have something that has a bit of a longer range. It's going to allow you a lot more flexibility to do more emergency long-term care planning. And I would also really get something that has an inflation rider, because the reason that we're concerned about all these costs is they just keep going up. They're going up for a couple of reasons. I mean, we see inflation is kind of impacting everything right now. We're in a hot spot for that. We do have a shortage of healthcare workers, especially kind of after COVID. So we have less people actually working in these industries. And we have an aging population, which means that long-term care costs are that much more important to plan for. I would say that when you start to get older than 65, if you're looking to get a quote on some of this, it does start to be more cost prohibitive. Now that's not exactly, I've seen other cases where it worked out because of a lump sum or good health conditions. But if you are in your late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s, anything like that, I would really take a look, speak to someone, get a quote about long-term care insurance. And one of the worst things you can do is listen to your neighbor or someone else who told you that, oh, it's just outrageously expensive. And I'm not trying to downplay that it can be expensive. You can't eat your insurance. You have to provide for other expenses. But if this is a concern, you need to get a quote, because then you know what it is for your particular circumstances, your health, and as well as what is it that you feel is expensive, because some of these other costs, they're very expensive. So I'd look into long-term care insurance, definitely. So beyond paying for it with income alone, having long-term care insurance help to cover it. There's just the fact of what do your assets look like? Because if someone is, Bill Gates of the world, ignoring his income, he'd have, so much in other assets that spending through all of those is just so improbable, if not impossible. So the hard part is there's no set limit on like where someone needs to be asset wise to not be worried about long-term care. It so matters what your shortfall is. So like the difference between your income and those costs to know how concerned you are about spending through the rest of that. But if you have so much in assets that it doesn't really matter how much you kind of start to get into that, use your money for you, then that's good too. There are some programs though that do help pay for care. So one of the first things I always like to identify is, is someone a wartime veteran or the surviving spouse of a wartime veteran? So I grabbed our book on this just to show you that basically what I'm talking about is, does someone's dates of service qualify them as a wartime veteran? So you'll see here, and these are kind of different than what you think in the history books, but a wartime veteran for World War II would be, December 7th of 1941 to December 31st of 1946. So don't just go purely based on the history books, that's the dates there. Now the Korean conflict, June 27th, 1950 to January 31st, 1955. Now I am seeing a lot of my clients fall in the weird gap between Korea and Vietnam, because Vietnam is, let's see, August 5th of 1964 to May 7th of 1975. So I do have a lot of clients who serve between kind of Korea and Vietnam who are not a wartime veteran. But if either yourself, your spouse, or someone in your family has served in the military, what you want to find is their discharge paperwork. So their DD 214. Now the good news is, and I know this from my clients too, veterans were told this is really important. This sheet of paper, do not lose this, keep it somewhere safe. It's very, very important. So they have it. It's just sometimes a question of where is it? And I often find that it's in a safe or a safety deposit box. So I check there. But you want to know when someone served, and then basically what they have to do, it have served for at least 90 days active duty, and only one of those days needs to fall within those wartime dates. So if you entered the Army on January 31st of 1955 and served for at least 90 days active duty, you are a Korean War veteran. So, and they have to have received anything other than a dishonorable discharge. So those are kind of the service requirements. Now I have been mentioning surviving spouses, and this is what I feel is kind of underserved. Your spouse, if they've passed away, their service can kind of transfer to their surviving spouse. Now, if you were divorced, that's different. But if your spouse passed away and they were a veteran and their dates of service qualify them for this, then you may also qualify for this benefit as well. Surviving spouses do not get as much of a pension benefit as veterans do, or as two veterans married to each other would. But it's really excellent, because what I like about this benefit is that it can really help to pay for care at home. Often care provided by a family member. And then what that can do is allow that person to maintain more independence at home before they would need to go into a facility. Or maybe they consider accessing things like independent living sooner, because that's what can help keep them, more independent. So with the VA, there's the dates of service requirement. There's also some income and asset requirements. So basically, I'll talk about the surviving spouses number. The VA kind of has three levels. They have their basic pension, then it pays a little bit more if you're housebound, but I've never seen anyone get that. And then their aid and attendance level. We're kind of focused on that aid and attendance level, because what that says is if someone needs assistance with the activities of daily living, that they can qualify for that kind of highest pension benefit. So what that is, per month for a surviving spouse right now is $1,600. Now it's tax-free pension that's paid to that surviving spouse, but it matters how much their income is. So if with their Social Security and pension, or whatever their income is, if they have more than that $1,600, the VA doesn't pay anything. If they had $1,000 in income, the VA would pay $600. But what is fantastic is that the VA deducts your unreimbursed medical expenses. So if you're just paying more on your care each month than you have an income, the VA will consider your income to be zero, and pay the full 1,600, which depending on your shortfall could mean there's no reason for Medicaid or other benefits at all. There's no estate recovery concern with the VA, which is why it's excellent there too. But what you're going to want to do is speak with what's called a VA accredited attorney, which I can say all of our attorneys here are VA accredited. You need someone who understands these benefits, how they work, and whether or not you'd qualify. I had an experience recently where someone, thought that they qualified and they went ahead and applied. And now we're actually in a rough position where they were kind of correctly denied. They weren't understanding the income requirements fully or the ADLs, but now we're in a holding period where we actually can't reapply because of their previous denial. So I would really, really talk to an attorney before you do this, or at least talk with the VA, so that way you're understanding how these benefits work and what you would be qualified for, just because it has those other implications there. But beyond the VA, and I'd just like to say, I haven't seen any questions yet. I'm happy to answer them if you have any. I haven't seen any yet. So I'm going to start talking a little bit more about what's called Medicaid. So Medicaid is the government program that pays for long-term care. So the VA is specific to someone's, wartime service. Medicaid is kind of for any U.S. citizen. And what this is focused on more is it has, asset and income requirements, just like the VA does. But what's different about Medicaid is a couple of things. The VA more cares about, it doesn't matter if you're single or individual asset wise, you can have the 148,000. And then basically what doesn't count towards that is a home and 2 acres. Medicaid is different. Medicaid has specific asset requirements that are based around whether or not someone is married or single. So it really depends, again, are you married or single if you're applying for Medicaid? And just to focus really briefly on if you're married, what happens is you can have a house, your primary residence. You can have, it's like $1,500 in face value of a life insurance, which no one really has unless you got a group policy or some little small thing your credit union gave you. You can also have some money set aside for burial expenses. So it's about $15,000 per person. You can set that money aside to purchase things for your spouse, for yourself, for your kids, for the spouses of your kids. Spend a lot of money on that, but unless that's actually your goal, it's not my actual planning recommendation. So you can have some money set aside for burial. You can have one vehicle, so it's not one vehicle per spouse, it's one vehicle. And then really what's important is retirement accounts for the spouse who's at home. So the spouse who's at home and not receiving care or applying for Medicaid, their retirement accounts are off the table. So hypothetically, you could have $1 million in retirement accounts for the healthy spouse, and if you qualify otherwise, you could be on Medicaid. But what I find is this is such a pendulum. I mean, in traditional spousal relationships, what I see sometimes with older generations is the husband was the one who worked. He had kind of the high amount of assets in retirement account. Wife might have some or almost none. And then he needs care because it is statistically more likely for husbands to need care first. So the difficulty with that is if the spouse who has all the retirement needs care, that all counts. It's only the retirement accounts of the spouse who's at home that don't count. So that can be really hit or miss. And that's not anything you can really plan around either. But it is important to know because it's a big distinction between married couples and individuals. Otherwise, pretty much you add up what's in your bank and investments. And, if you have more life insurance on that basic amount, and you combine all that up, the retirement accounts of the spouse who's receiving care, and that all has to be below $148,000. Now that's kind of a half though. What they do is they say that the floor is 50,000, the max is 148, and wherever you fall between there, you get to keep half of up to that limit of 148. So if you have less than $50,000 in countable assets, you can be on Medicaid. If you had $200,000 in countable assets, you have to spend on to 100,000. And if you had, more than that, so say you had 300,000, you have to spend down to the 148. So that's where people are talking about spend down to actually be on Medicaid. So that's what the Medicaid assets look like. For a single person, this is a really big shift. So you can have a house. The difficulty is for a single person, if you have a house and access Medicaid, what happens when you pass away is they place a lien against your home for up to the value of whatever they paid out in benefits. So depending on how long you received care, that can, end up taking away the entire equity in someone's home. So if you hear people talk about, mom or dad passed away and then the nursing home came and took their home, that's not the nursing home. That's a program called estate recovery. And it's because someone accessed Medicaid. Now, you can also have, that $1,500 face value life insurance. You can have the car, you can have some money for burial, but otherwise everything else counts and you have to spend below $2,000. So it's a big shift from married people to single individuals. Now, the $2,000 hasn't been kind of updated since the 60s. That's why it feels so low. It's not going up with inflation like the $148,000 is. So once someone is on Medicaid, how that really works is, they're spending more of their care, more of their income on care each month. They're below those asset levels. And then basically the state takes their income. That individual gets to keep $45 a month. And the rest of it goes to the state, to their cost of care share. And then you have kind of these state recovery components of the government coming and kind of taking whatever is left at the end. So unless you have other sorts of things, which is often where I'm talking to clients where we're talking about paying for care, doing proactive planning around this, meaning that we're moving assets into something like an irrevocable trust, which protects them from care costs, makes them both unavailable as a countable asset and then unavailable for estate recovery. So there's options that you can do with that. The best kind of planning is proactive planning, planning in advance. The reason is because Medicaid has a 5-year look back, the VA has a 3-year look back. You end up, mathematically ahead if you plan in advance. But that's not to say that you can't plan if you're currently facing care costs right now. So look at what you have in income, look at what you have in other assets. If you don't have long-term care insurance, are you a veteran? Are you worried about Medicaid? And then it really matters that you have good powers of attorney. So absolutely everyone needs powers of attorney in order to, potentially do some of this planning if you're to become disabled or incapacitated. So with powers of attorney, or if someone has capacity, we could set up planning to be able to preserve assets around care costs. And then really what the beauty of that is being able to supplement programs like Medicaid. The reason is really because those Medicaid levels are so low and they pay for your necessities. And what you want to be able to do is support above and beyond that for the other things that individual might need. And then whatever is in that trust when they pass away goes to the family or their intended beneficiaries rather than the state. So that's kind of what we do as far as planning around those cares. And I'm sorry if I rushed through this. It's a big topic. It's a big topic. And if you have any questions or would like to do that initial consultation, again, that paperwork will be sent out to you. You can sign up for that. Otherwise, I don't think I saw any questions. I'm just at about my time. So I will give it a minute in case anyone needs anything. And then otherwise, you can always email events@hooperlawoffice.com. So perfect. All right, then I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good afternoon.